first let's talk about, well, what if it's not good enough? And that made me think about some advice that I've given relating to criticism. Because that's another thing that seems to undo creative folks when it comes to, is my work good enough? Is because critics of your work are everywhere. And I mean everywhere. And some of them are well-meaning, and some of them are completely thoughtless, and some of them are outright malicious. So, there's that. And there's the question of how to take criticism, I think, comes before the question of, is my work good enough? Because if you don't know how to take criticism, I would argue that you're really not ready to be able to put work out there, to let it go in the world. Then in that sense, your work isn't, I won't say good enough, I'll say ready. Because you're going to have to be able to make something, create it, give it life, and let it go. And that's what you do, is you have to release it into the world to fend for itself, and it will get criticism. And then there are, there's only a few ways to deal with that. Is you can either completely ignore it, which is kind of not helpful particularly. I mean, unless it's just useless criticism. But what you really need to do is look at the criticism you got and ask yourself, number one, I always like to say, well, where did it come from? Who criticized you? Was it your snarky sister-in-law? Well, maybe maybe you don't need to listen to that. The source. If the source is someone who actually has some bearing of knowledge in your subject, I mean, just because a lawyer critiques your artwork doesn't mean it's worth what he says. But if a gallery owner says something to you, maybe you should listen. Mm-hmm. So where's the source? Is the source of this something that has bearing on the subject? And is it someone who is either not invested or at least not trying to undermine you? Because that happens a lot. So that you have to ask that. And then you have to look at the meat of the criticism. Because I have had some really ugly criticism of some of my work. And some of it has merit. Some of it was baseless. So you have to look at the criticism and say, well, that you have to look for the part of it that you agree or disagree with and say, well, yeah, I agree with that. That particular, in this case, book, yes, the designs in this book weren't as good as they could be. Okay, then, and that's fair. And why? And then you can sort that out for yourself, because that's information that the critic doesn't have. Mm-hmm. It's why the work wasn't as good as it should be. They don't know that, but you do. And you can answer that. And if you think it's meritless, well, then you can say, well, okay, I see that, but I don't agree with it. And that's fine too. But have a reason, not just, I don't agree with it because I don't like it. That's not a good reason. That's just avoiding it. Mm-hmm. So that brings you to a point where you can take the criticism that you got and say, well, okay, yes, these designs weren't as good as they could be. And knowing something the critic didn't, it's because the timeline was way too short and, it had to go to press. So, then the next time you're going to do that again to adjust your schedule. Mm. Or maybe if it was your drawing skills weren't good enough, say, that your drawing was a little wonky around the eyes or something, you're going to take drawing lessons, or you're just going to practice drawing every day. You then make a plan to address the weakness. So, that gets you to taking criticism and taking it for what it's worth, and not blowing it out of proportion, and not dismissing it entirely, and not letting it stop you.
Yeah, I like that. It's like basically taking all kinds of criticism and making it constructive, whether or not it was even intended to be constructive in the first place.
Absolutely.